Hey guys, it's Scott with Scottie B Cards, and in this video I want to discuss if a player is a good buy by using WAR. WAR, wins above replacement, is a new-ish statistic in the last probably 10 to 15 years, and it's a very controversial statistic. And the reason for that is because it's relatively hard to calculate. At least you have to know what the factors are compared to batting average. You know how batting average works. If you get 1 hit out of 10 at-bats, that's a 100 batting average, and it just is easier to break down. But WAR, if you actually look at it, is used for a lot of good reasons. So in this video, I want to show how you can use WAR to identify a player you want to buy for the long term. I'm going to explain how it works, and I want to discuss some other statistics in baseball card collecting and why it's important. So the first thing is, what is the best stat? Is it hits? Hits are the best, right? Because if you have 3,000 hits, it means you're a great hitter in the Hall of Fame. That is a true statement, but the hard thing is only 27 current Hall of Famers have 3,000 hits, only about 10%. If we want to do home runs are the best. That's how you can tell a player is going to be the best player of all time if they have the most home runs, but only 28 players have more than 500 home runs, which actually surprised me. I thought there would be more. I think only 4 or 5 have 600 home runs, but only 10.45% of players ever have over 500 home runs. The next thing I want to show is a comparison between Lou Brock and Ken Griffey Jr. and why WAR does a good job of saying Ken Griffey Jr. is the better player. And Ken Griffey Jr., in my opinion, is the better player. If we look at traditional stats, however, we can see Lou Brock has a batting average of 293 versus Griffey's 284. Lou Brock has 3,000 hits. Griffey only has 2,700 hits, almost 2,800 hits. And you can see Lou Brock has 900 stolen bases versus Griffey's 184. If you saw those, you might think just those 3 stats in a vacuum, you would definitely think Lou Brock was a better player. You'll even see Lou Brock won 2 World Series, and Ken Griffey Jr. didn't win any World Series, so that means Lou Brock is better. But if you look at some more advanced statistics, you'll see, like with WAR, Ken Griffey Jr.'s WAR is 83.8, while Lou Brock's is 45.3. OPS plus, which takes into consideration the player's OPS for the era they played in, and also in comparison to the ballpark factors and things like that. Griffey's was 136, 100 is league average, so Griffey was 36% better than league average offensively for his full career. In the first 10 years, he was significantly better than that. The last 10 years, he wasn't nearly as good. But we can see that with Lou Brock, he's only a 109 OPS plus, only 9% better. This isn't even discussing gold gloves. When we look at gold gloves, Ken Griffey Jr. has 10 gold gloves, and Lou Brock was actually a really bad defensive outfielder. And that plays into why WAR is so much higher for Griffey and so much lower for Lou Brock. But all these stats can get so confusing. If you hyper-focus on any one stat when evaluating a player, you're doing it wrong. So this is something that WAR does. It takes into consideration your batting runs, how effectively you are offensively, your base running runs, how much value you add on the base paths, your fielding runs. So actually, if you're a good defender, it takes your position into play. So a center fielder has more value than a first baseman because a center fielder who hits 30 home runs is more valuable than a first baseman who hits 30 home runs because it's easier to replace that production for a first baseman versus a center fielder. League adjustment, and that just means the league average where it's at, and that also takes into consideration ballpark factors. And then replacement runs, which is the actual replacement players play through that year. And then they take that divided by runs per wins. It's a pretty simple formula. If you want to dive into each of these, how these are calculated more, feel free. But you're going to see this over here. If you have 6+ WAR, it's MVP level. If you have 4 to 5, it's an all-star level, and so forth. So that's how you can identify how WAR works. It takes into consideration offense, defense, base running, everything that you need to see if a player is a good player. And if we could look at Ken Griffey Jr. versus Lou Brock was not as good offensively, and he was not as good defensively. He was a better base runner, but other than that, Griffey beat him out. And because of that, that is why we'll see with Griffey, his WAR is so much higher. One thing I want to say before I jump into this is the top players all time, according to WAR, is basically how you would have the top players all time in your top 10. They might be slightly different, but overall, players with high WAR generally are good players. There's hardly any players who have really high WAR that don't make the Hall of Fame, or players who make the Hall of Fame who have low WAR. Lou Brock is kind of an outlier because at the time when they voted, 3,000 hits, it was the biggest, most important stat, which it still is. I think he would still get voted into the Hall of Fame for that. But you can just see, if we look at the top, for not the older guys, you have Babe Ruth, but then you have Barry Bonds, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Stan Musial, Ted Williams, Alex Rodriguez, he was really good, Ricky Henderson, then we can see Mickey Mantle. You can see that it makes sense who is there and who isn't. It generally favors the 5-tool players. That's why Albert Pujols is so low, because he was a first baseman. He has that positional adjustment because, again, if he was a center fielder, he'd probably be a little bit higher on this list. But it does take into consideration all the stats needed to say if a player has added value. It's an accumulative stat, so if a player has 10 WAR 2 years in a row, they have 20 for their career. They have 5 10 years in a row, that means they're worth 50 WAR for those 10 years, and so forth. So that is WAR. That's kind of how it works. I know people have asked recently what WAR is, and the reason I'm explaining this is because I'm going to show some graphs next and how you can use these graphs on Fangraphs to actually make some money potentially, or at least see some opportunities that others might not be looking at. And let's dive into Fangraphs. So very first thing you're going to see right here is this is a Fangraphs page. It lets you compare different players with their WAR for their top seasons through a certain age, and it just shows like which players have had the most WAR all lined up, taking consideration each age at a time. So I want to look at through each individual player's age. We have Nolan Arenado, Miguel Cabrera, Paul Goldschmidt, Bryce Harper, Joey Votto. All these players are viewed as Hall of Famers or borderline Hall of Famers. And I want to just look at where they were through each point of their career. One thing I want to point out is the importance of debuting early. It makes it so much easier. By the time we see Paul Goldschmidt and Joey Votto debut, Bryce Harper already had 22 WAR. And that's because he debuted at age 19, which I know is super straightforward, but some people still will say like, hey, is X player a good buy? And it's like, no, he debuted at age 27. There's no way he can have a sustainable long career, because all these players, if they make the Hall of Fame, it helps their values. Look at Larry Walker. His cards were worth hardly anything once he made the Hall of Fame. Now they're worth quite a bit, which sucks for me because a lot of his rookies like the Tiffany PSA 10s are up significantly where they were. If you want to look at Harold Baines even, people are trying to collect their Hall of Fame runs, and Harold Baines is now included in the Hall of Fame, so his cards spiked unexpectedly when the Veterans Committee actually voted him in unexpectedly. So that's why the Hall of Fame is important. It's just for long-term value and how they can hold that value. So here is this stat. You can see Miguel Cabrera is the highest of all these players at 68.6 WAR for his career. At one point, he was at 70.7, but he's been a negative defensive player and probably a negative offensive player the last few years, which has hurt his stats. Then we have Joey Votto at age 38 with 58 WAR. We see Paul Goldschmidt trending up in the green right here, having a very, very good mid-30s, while we see most players declining right now. And we see Bryce Harper at 44.2 WAR at this point. So at the age of 29, you can see all of these players next to each other. This tool is super helpful for comparing any players you want. You can compare Billy Butler to Ty Cobb if you're really wanting to. Ty Cobb's WAR will be a lot higher than Billy Butler's, but you can do that. And you're going to see right here, this age 30 is important because there's a certain threshold where they need to be at age 30 for them on average to make the Hall of Fame. You can see again for Miguel Cabrera, he's so much higher than players like Votto and Goldschmidt because he debuted at age 20 versus age 23/24. So let's just throw somebody in here. I want to throw Mike Trout into this chart. I want to show the difference of why Mike Trout's cards are worth so much money. Here's Mike Trout. You can see he's just on another stratosphere. Here is through age 30. Joey Votto had 33 WAR, Paul Goldschmidt had 36 WAR, Miguel Cabrera had 55, Arenado had 38, and Trout has been worth 82 WAR through his age 30 season. And it's not really a secret how good he's been, but sometimes it's hard. We get caught up in the all-time great conversation. People say Trout doesn't belong there. He's never had playoff success. But neither has Barry Bonds, Ted Williams, Ken Griffey Jr. I can go on and on. I know the big thing is they haven't made the playoffs. Those other players at least made the playoffs, but regardless, that's still the argument. So you can see Mike Trout was head and shoulders above the competition at the time. I also want to show some younger players. So here's Ronald Acuna Jr., Juan Soto, and Tatis versus Bryce Harper. All these players debuted at age 19 or age 20. You can see Juan Soto's the green, Bryce Harper's the black, Acuna's the blue, and Tatis Jr. is the orange. And you can see at this point through age 22, Juan Soto and Bryce Harper are quite a bit ahead of Acuna and Tatis. Go to age 23, we haven't seen that from Tatis yet, but Juan Soto has overtaken Bryce Harper and Ronald Acuna Jr. And we can just kind of project Juan Soto's career based off of these numbers. This is a tough one of 2020 because he didn't get much of a bump, but he hasn't had a great year this year. Bryce Harper's had up and down years. You can expect Juan Soto to basically follow Bryce Harper. I think he's going to beat Bryce Harper's 44 WAR by age 29, probably around 50 to 60, but regardless, that's where he'll be at age 29 to 30 is 50 to 60 WAR based off of these numbers. If we want to throw someone in like Albert Pujols, let's compare him to these players. And we can see that Albert Pujols at age 23 was at 22.2 WAR, very similar to Bryce Harper and Juan Soto. And then he had a 10 WAR season. And then he had an 8 WAR season. And then he had, it just continues and continues up. This is the path a player needs to take that's a young superstar to actually maintain value, like an Albert Pujols. Even Bryce Harper, he's had ups and downs with his value. He's going up right now because of the playoffs, and he's had 2 MVPs. But there needs to be a lot to happen for these young players to actually maintain value than what they're currently doing and the value they have in the hobby. And that's one thing we don't quite get. We buy into this hype, but we can see a Wander Franco is probably not going to be at this position where Albert Pujols was at age 25 with 37 WAR. We can take it one step further again with Mike Trout. I love Mike Trout, which is why I'm showing him again. And you'll see Mike Trout is even further ahead of the curve. By the time Mike Trout was 23 years old, he had 40 WAR. By the time he was 25, he had 47 WAR, 53 WAR, and he's just so far above the competition. So you need to compare to historical comps and see what the upside of that player is. A lot of these players are below the Bryce Harper threshold, and if that's the case, they're probably worth less than Bryce Harper for a few reasons. They're not playing as good, and on top of that, they have significantly more rookie cards than Bryce Harper. So if he can't hold value, maybe these other players aren't a good buy. That's kind of what I wanted to show. You can use this for Devers, Bogarts, anybody you would like. Jose Ramirez, compare them historically to players that might be similar, and you can get an idea if they are or are not a good buy. Let's now go to the all-time great chart. This all-time great chart, I have Hank Aaron, Barry Bonds, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Mike Trout, and Stan Musial. It's a very similar graph, like shockingly similar how they've all maintained pretty close. At the end of their careers, let's go to where Mickey Mantle was. Mickey Mantle ended with 112, so he's about right here. But here at the top is Barry Bonds in the black, Hank Aaron in the blue, Willie Mays in the orange, and Stan Musial in the red. Stan Musial is 126 WAR, and you can go from there for the rest. But you can see Mike Trout, he was above everybody through his age 27 season, basically by quite a bit. He was at 71.3 WAR. Mickey Mantle was the next closest with 67.9. Then he got 2020, then he got hurt, and now we have this year with a 6 to 7 WAR season. But he's still higher than a lot of these players. Mike Trout's at 82 WAR, Willie Mays is 73, Mickey Mantle's 91, he's been the highest. So it's fun to compare against these historical comps to see why these comps are being made with this one statistics of overall value. And if we continue forward, are we going to see a Mickey Mantle career where he ends up really taping off at age 36, being done with his career at 112? Or is he going to end up with a Hank Aaron career or a Willie Mays career? So you can try to project based off of these statistics. If you average 5 WAR season the next 5 seasons, that's 25 WAR, and you can get an idea of where that player would be. My best guess is he'll be right around Stan Musial, right between Mickey Mantle and Stan Musial, maybe slightly above Stan Musial, but below Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and Barry Bonds. So that's where I imagine this graph is going to go. If we want to add in someone like Ken Griffey Jr., you're going to see pretty shockingly, Griffey was actually on the same all-time path as all these players. Basically, he was above Willie Mays and below Stan Musial, and then he ended up just not doing anything for his 30s because he got hurt time and time again. So could that be Trout? Potentially. And that's what you have to compare. He's not going to be worth as much as Willie Mays, but he might be Ken Griffey Jr., and that's kind of what you want to look for. I want to show Grady Sizemore because it's so crazy to see what happened to Grady Sizemore. But if you look at Grady Sizemore, which is also the risk of young players, he was literally on the same path as these Hall of Famers, and then he just fell off. Like, he got injured and got hurt, but he was elite for a long time. And so I just want to show one other player in Derek Jeter. I just want to show how he is more of a typical Hall of Famer, probably above the average mean for WAR. But here's Derek Jeter and Ken Griffey Jr., and here's the all-time great path up here. And that's what Mike Trout's on. He could end up anywhere in this range, but we have to have our players be in that range to really have that long-term value. So I would compare your young players. I'll leave the link to this really cool chart where you can throw in whoever you would like and see where your players are at and if they are or are not a good buy. So that's what I wanted to show. Thank you for watching this video, guys, and I will catch you in the next one. See ya.